and we are in part 2. So 2 or 3 months went by without any mention of my being a prodigy. And then one day, my mother was watching the Ed Sullivan Show on TV. The TV was old and the sound kept shorting out. Every time my mother got halfway up from the sofa to adjust the set, the sound would come back on and Sullivan would be talking. As soon as she sat down, Sullivan would go silent again. She got up. The TV broke into loud piano music. She sat down. Silence. Up and down, back and forth, quiet and loud. It was like a stiff, embraceless dance between her and the TV set. Finally, she stood by the set with her hand on the sound dial. You guys probably don't remember this, but before internet, you kind of had to move the antenna around on the TV to get it to work. It sounds like that's what she's doing. She seemed entranced by the music, a frenzied little piano piece with a mesmerizing quality, which alternated between quick, playful passages and teasing, lilting ones. "Nikan!" my mother said, calling me over with hurried hand gestures. "Look here!" I could see why my mother was fascinated by the music. It was being pounded out by a little Chinese girl, about 9 years old, with a Peter Pan haircut. The girl had the sauciness of Shirley Temple. She was properly modest, like a proper Chinese child, and she did a fancy sweep and a curtsy, so the fluffy skirt of her white dress cascaded to the floor like petals of a white carnation. In spite of these warning signs, I wasn't worried. Our family had no piano, and we couldn't afford to buy one, let alone reams of sheet music and piano lessons. Ugh! So I could be generous in my comments when my mother badmouthed the little girl on TV. "Play note right, but doesn't sound good," my mother complained. "No singing sound." "What are you picking on her for?" I said carelessly. "She's pretty good. Maybe she's not the best, but she's trying hard." I knew almost immediately that I would be sorry I had said that. "Just like you," she said, "not the best, because you're not trying." She gave a little huff as she let go of the sound dial and sat down on the sofa. The little Chinese girl sat down also to play an encore of Anitra's Tons by Griege. I remember the song because later on I had to learn how to play it. 3 days after watching the Ed Sullivan Show, my mother told me what my schedule would be for piano lessons and piano practice. She had talked to Mr. Chong, who lived on the first floor of our apartment building. Mr. Chong was a retired piano teacher, and my mother had traded house cleaning services for lessons and a piano for me to practice on every day, 2 hours a day, from 4 until 6. When my mother told me this, I felt as though I had been sent to hell. I whined and then kicked my foot a little when I couldn't stand it anymore. "Why don't you like me the way I am?" I cried. "I'm not a genius. I can't play the piano. And even if I could, I wouldn't go on TV if you paid me $1 million. My mother slapped me. "Who asked you to be a genius?" she shouted. "Only ask you for your best, for your sake. You think I want you to be a genius? Huh! What for? Who asked you?" "So ungrateful," I heard her mutter in Chinese. "If she had as much talent as she has temper, she'd be famous now." Mr. Chong, who I secretly nicknamed Old Chong, was very strange, always tapping his fingers to the silent music of an invisible orchestra. He looked ancient in my eyes. He had lost most of the hair on top of his head, and he wore thick glasses and had eyes that always looked tired. But he must have been younger than I thought. since he lived with his mother and was not yet married. I met old lady Chong once, and that was enough. She had a peculiar smell, like a baby's that had done something in its pants. And her finger felt like a dead person, like an old peach I once found at the back of a refrigerator. It felt like its skin just slid off its flesh when I picked it up. Okay, guys, we're going to go back into Padlet, and then we're going to take just a quick little brain break. And so my third question for you guys is this. All right, my friends, so there we go. Great. All right. So as we left off, the girl started taking lessons, the daughter started taking lessons with this man named Old Chong. So let's see what happens as she takes these piano lessons. So maybe I never really gave myself a fair chance. I did pick up the basics pretty quickly, and I might have become a good pianist at the young age. But I was so determined not to try, not to be anybody different, and I learned to play only the most ear-splitting preludes, the most discordant hymns. Don't forget, when something is discordant, it has a really ugly sound. So she's playing very bad. Over the next year, I practiced like this, dutifully in my own way. And then one day, I heard my mother and her friend Lindo Zhang both after church, and I was leaning against a brick wall, wearing a dress with stiff white petticoats. Auntie Lindo's daughter, Waverly, who was my age, was standing farther down the wall about 5 feet away. We had grown up together and shared all the closeness of two sisters, squabbling over crayons and dolls. In other words, for the most part, we hated each other. I thought she was snotty. Waverly Zhang had gained a certain amount of fame as Chinatown's littlest Chinese chess champion. She brings home too many trophies, Auntie Lindo lamented that Sunday. All day she plays chess. All day I have no time to do nothing but dust off her winnings. She threw a scolding look at Waverly, who pretended not to see her. You're lucky you don't have this problem, Auntie Lindo said with a sigh to my mother. And my mother squared her shoulders and bragged, Our problem is worse than yours. If we ask Jingmei to wash a dish, she hears nothing but music. It's like you can't stop this natural talent. And right then, I was determined to put a stop to her foolish pride. A few weeks later, Old Chong and my mother conspired to have me play in a talent show that was to be held in the church hall. But then my parents had saved up enough to buy me a second-hand piano, a black Wurlitzer spinet with a scarred bench. It was the showpiece of our living room. For the talent show, I was to play a piece called Pleading Child from Schumann's Scenes from Childhood. It was a simple, moody piece that seemed more difficult than it was. I was supposed to memorize the whole thing, but I dawdled over it, playing a few bars and then cheating, looking up to see what notes followed. I never really listened to what I was playing. I daydreamed about being someone else. The part I liked to practice best was the fancy curtsy. Right foot out, touch the rose on the carpet, sweep to the side, bend your left leg, look up and smile. My parents invited all the couples from their social club to witness my debut. Auntie Lindo and Uncle Tin were there. Waverly and her 2 older brothers had also come. The first 2 rows were filled with children either younger or older than I was. The littlest ones got to go first. They recited simple nursery rhymes, squawked out tunes on miniature violins, and twirled hula hoops in pink ballet tutus. And when they bowed or curtsied, the audience would sigh in unison, "Aww," and then they would clap enthusiastically. When my turn came, I was very confident. I remember my childish excitement. It was as if I knew, without a doubt, that the prodigy side of me really did exist. I had no fear whatsoever, no nervousness. I remember thinking, this is it, this is it. I looked out over the audience at my mother's blank face, my father's yawn, Auntie Linda's stiff-lipped smile, Waverly's sulky expression. I had on a white dress, layered with sheets of lace and a pink bow in my Peter Pan haircut. As I sat down, I envisioned people jumping to their feet and Ed Sullivan rushing up to introduce me to everyone on TV. When I stood up, I discovered my legs were shaking. Maybe I had just been nervous, and the audience, like old Chong, had seen me go through the right motions and had not heard anything wrong at all. I swept my right foot out, went down on my knee, looked up and smiled. The room was quiet, except for old Chong, who was beaming and shouting, "Bravo! Bravo! Well done!" By then, I saw my mother's face, her stricken face. The audience clapped weakly, and I walked back to my chair with my whole face quivering as I tried not to cry. I heard a little boy whisper loudly to his mother, "That was awful." My mother whispered, "Well, she certainly tried." And now I realized how many people were in the audience. The whole world, it seemed. I was aware of eyes burning into my back. I felt the shame of my mother and father as they sat stiffly through the rest of the show. We could have escaped during intermission. Pride and some strange sense of honor must have anchored my parents to their chairs. And so we watched it all. The 18-year-old boy with a fake mustache who did a magic show and juggled flaming hoops while riding a unicycle. The girl with white makeup who sang an aria from Madame Butterfly and got an honorable mention. And the 11-year-old boy who was first prize playing a tricky violin sound that sounded like a busy bee. After the show, the Sues, the Jongs, and the St. Clairs from the Joy Luck Club came up to my mother and father. "Lots of talented kids," Auntie Lindo said vaguely, smiling broadly. "That was something else," my father said, and I wondered if he was referring to me in a humorous way, or whether he even remembered what I had done. Waverly looked at me and shrugged her shoulders. "You aren't a genius like me," she said matter-of-factly. And if I hadn't felt so bad, I would have pulled her braids and punched her stomach. But my mother's expression was what devastated me. A quiet, blank look that said she had lost everything. I felt the same way, and everybody seemed to now be coming up, like gawkers at the scene of an accident, to see what parts were actually missing. When we got on the bus to go home, my father was humming the Busy Bee tune, and my mother kept silent. I kept thinking she wanted to wait until we got home before shouting at me. But when my father unlocked the door to our apartment, my mother walked in and went straight to the back into the bedroom. No accusations, no blame. And in a way, I felt disappointed. I had been waiting for her to start shouting so I could shout back and cry and blame her for all of my misery.